Welcome everyone again. Next speaker is Olivier Penel. He is the head of global advisory at SAS, talking about accelerate innovation with responsible AI. He's joining us from UK, and responsible AI provides an alternative approach to mitigate the ethical risks of adopting AI technology. Such a huge and important topic today. So what do you need to know to get started? This question will be answered by Oliver, and welcome to the stage.
And thank you very much, Anita, for the introductions. So let me jump in. What if being socially responsible was good for business? What if doing the right thing, being fair, transparent, and accountable could also help drive value from data science investments? What I'm going to argue today is that those notions of ethics, sustainability, privacy, greater good on one side, and on the other side, innovation, profits, and digital transformation on the other side, are not only compatible, but also responsible AI has the potential to accelerate innovation and value realization. And I will provide some guidelines about how to make it work and how to get started. As you might know, responsible AI was identified by Gartner as the #1 market trend for data and analytics in 2021. And on top of this, we now have a proposed regulation for artificial intelligence that was put forward by the EU Commission a few months ago. And this is not just a European obsession with regulations. Many governments across the world are working to develop new regulatory frameworks for AI. As part of my work at SAS, I have the opportunity to engage with many customers across the world, and I can see how the questions we're getting have shifted from how can I help my business with AI, because this is now a given for most people, to how can I use AI at scale and responsibly to achieve tangible business outcomes. So how did we get there? How we get there is the result of three forces that dramatically change our use, and I'd like to say our relationship with the technology and the impact that algorithms have on our lives and in the world that we live in. Those three forces are acceleration, delegation, and amplification. But acceleration first. Acceleration that is made possible by the exponential increase of the data available and the storage and computing capacities. An acceleration that has been fueled also in the last couple of years by the COVID crisis. A recent survey from McKinsey has shown that responses to the COVID-19 crisis has speeded up the adoption of digital technologies by several years, and that many of those changes could be here for the long haul. And this is not just about supporting virtual working environments and collaboration. Organizations have realized that they need to be able to rely on their analytics and digital services in order to build resilience, being more competitive, and to survive in those uncertain times. Acceleration that is also driven by what I call the tyranny of instantaneity and the consumer's demand for instant access to online services. It seems like we're all behaving like kids again, right? We want everything, we want it now, and there is a clear expectation from consumers that products, services, information, everything should be available online and immediately. Now, who wants to get back to the time when to buy something, you had to face the cold and the crowd, to shop around in the high street? Well, maybe some of you do, I personally don't. And I'm sure nobody wants to go back to the time when to get a loan, you had to visit a branch of a bank, speak to a human being, fill a form, and wait 3 weeks, if you're lucky, to get a response. AI clearly emerged as a competitive differentiator because people expect to be able to use those digital services for everything. Now, the second aspect that strikes me is how much of our decision-making we are prepared to delegate to robots or algorithms. Let's talk about the stock market trading, for example. Today, about 85% of all stock market transactions are done automatically with algorithms with no intervention from human beings whatsoever. When this is quite convenient and lucrative for traders, investment bankers, and hedge funds, We know, as a matter of fact, that this played a big part in the stock market crashes that we've seen in the past, with real-life consequences on the life and wealth of individuals. This raises questions about the accountability, the explainability, and the trustworthiness of those algorithms used for automated trading. Now, this is an extreme example, but there are so many decisions that we now expect computers to make for us. The information that we get when we search for something online, the best route to go to the airport, the operating of traffic lights, planes, nuclear reactors, or the detection of fraudulent transactions on our bank accounts. We seem to have developed a blinded faith in the capacity of algorithms to make the right decisions. And in a way, algorithms are much better than humans to do certain things, like processing vast amounts of data to identify patterns and make predictions. But algorithms are lacking common sense, culture, and context. They just learn from the data that they are being fed with. They might be very effective, but they're also very narrow, leading to AI systems making predictions or decisions that are technically correct, but socially unacceptable. We see AI applications extending and sometimes replacing humans to make decisions on our behalf, but can we trust them? What standards and codes of ethics are being used to make those decisions? Who's responsible for the decisions made, and what are the consequences when a bad decision is made? Why shouldn't algorithms share similar codes of ethics, standards, and face the consequence of bad decisions like humans? And finally, amplification. Amplification of how much AI applications can achieve compared to human beings and how many decisions they can make in the blink of an eye. The issue is, we know that algorithms make mistakes sometimes. It's inevitable. And the bad predictions usually lead to a bad decision with real consequence in the real world. It's one thing for an individual to make a bad or unfair decision, but algorithms make decisions at scale and in real time. The reach of AI systems is millions of times greater, so the consequence of bad decisions get much bigger very quickly. In effect, AI is acting as an amplifier or an echo chamber. So the bias that exists in our brain, whether or not we are aware of it, and the discriminations that exist in the real world, whether we like it or not, are being amplified by artificial intelligence. Those concerns are perfectly justified, but what doesn't help, in my opinion, is the overwhelming media coverage that failing AI systems get in the press. It's all over the news. Not a single day goes without one of those high-profile cases making the headlines. The killer robot fantasy is indeed very good material for journalists, but it's fueling fears in the general public and with decision makers who, understandably, don't want to make those mistakes and damage their brand. To some extent, I think this is understandable, right? Public awareness and regulators are catching up with the technology innovation that has gone unchecked for some time. Some people have decided to take this into their hands and to do something about it. There are countless initiatives, associations who are determined to tackle this issue, raising awareness about it and developing guidelines and best practices to address it. I don't know if you've seen a documentary called Coded Bias. It's a great documentary, shedding lights on the discriminations and the lack of transparency in certain usage of AI technologies, such as facial recognition. Although the documentary provides a quite enlightening look into the ethical issues surrounding the use of AI, it completely misses the counter-argument that AI is also good for society. Let's not forget the huge benefits that AI can and does deliver to individuals, society, and to the environment. For instance, by helping to protect the Amazon rainforest or endangered species, providing more insight to help doctors to make the right diagnosis earlier, tackling issues like child abuse, homelessness, or mental health care. The problem is all this goodness is shadowed by highly publicized cases like this story that you probably heard about, the Thai chatterbot released by Microsoft on Twitter in 2016. Now, in just 16 hours, the chatterbot went from uh, saying humans are super cruel to releasing racist, sexually charged, and all kind of very offensive comments. The fact is that Thai was learning from people on Twitter who interacted with it. And they clearly had a lot of fun throwing horrible things at it. The issue was perfectly summed up when Thai responded to someone saying, "You are a stupid machine," by, "Well, I learned from the best. And if you don't understand that, let me spell it out for you. I learned from you and you are dumb too." Now, this is just a funny example of how AI gone wrong. But it was also a great learning experience for data scientists at Microsoft and beyond about the need for oversight in the data fed to a machine learning algorithm and the question of accountability about the output of AI applications. So what is AI exactly? Let me start by saying that there is no such thing as responsible AI. In the same way as there is no such thing as a responsible calculator. When I use this calculator for my tax return, for example, if I make a mistake in my calculation and inadvertently declare less revenue than I should, can we blame the calculator for this? Can we say that it didn't behave responsibly? I wish we could blame my calculator, but unfortunately, no, we can't. The calculator didn't do anything wrong. It was my use of the calculator that was questionable, which is why I think we should talk about the responsible use of AI rather than responsible AI. Now, to be fair, the difference between the calculator and a typical AI system is that with the calculator, I was the one providing clear instructions in terms of the numbers I entered and the operations I selected. I didn't ask the calculator to learn from previous calculations and to predict a result. So the analogy is not perfect, but I'm sure that you're getting my point. Okay, so we're all good citizens, right? So the question becomes, how can we use the technology available to us responsibly? How do we reconcile the two sides of those seemingly opposing worlds? On one side, the ethics and the greater good, and on the other side, capitalism and profit. I think this tension between ethics and business is very superficial. Responsible AI is actually good for business. Beyond the greater good and social responsibility, responsible AI is all about trust, and it's emerging as a business imperative and a key enabler for digital transformation. There are many good reasons why you should care about responsible AI. It might be to develop a trusted relationship with customers and differentiate from your competition, or to mitigate the risk of reputational damage, avoiding the risk of negative publicity, the risk of having angry customers asking for clarity about how their data has been used, why their loan application was not approved. Or it could be about complying with existing and future regulations, like the one proposed by the EU Commission. Or it's to meet the customers' and stakeholders' demand for ethical business practices. But at the end of the day, it's all about building trust, not just with customers, but also internally with the people who are the users of AI systems. Without trust, there is no adoption. Now, I'll give you an example. I recently worked with a customer who developed a predictive model to evaluate the likelihood of a sales opportunity to be successful. The goal was quite simply to help the commercial team to focus their efforts where it really mattered, hence increasing the effectiveness of the sales organization, delivering more revenue with the same resources. But because of the lack of transparency of the model that was built as a black box model, sellers didn't really trust it and tended to ignore the recommendation of the AI system, prioritizing their work as they always did before, using their instincts. As a result, all the resources spent to develop and deploy this model were completely wasted and the value was never realized. Building trust in AI is not an easy task, and many still have the perception that implementing responsible AI principles is going to make things difficult, that you will have to add controls, safeguards, oversight, and that all this additional processing is going to get in the way of fast-paced iterative innovation. According to a recent study from Deloitte, 95% of executives said that they were concerned about the ethical risk of AI adoption, concerns about damaging their brand, about reducing the trust that customers, partners, and employees have placed in it, to the point that 56% of them were slowing down their AI adoption. All those people concerned about the implications of AI are right. They should be concerned. But one cannot address those concerns by taking a step back, but taking a step forward in the right direction. The reason why I'm saying this is because the ingredients needed to infuse responsible AI principles into AI decisioning systems are the same as those needed to operationalize and to scale analytics. In AI, actionability and accountability are closely related. As you probably know, the main obstacle to realize value from data science today is the difficulty to bring prescriptive machine learning models from the lab, where data scientists develop those models, to a production environment where decisions are made and value is created. It is estimated that only a third of all the models developed by data scientists are ever deployed in production. Can you imagine the waste of resources and missed opportunities? It's unbelievable. And in addition, for those machine learning models that actually get deployed in production, it takes a disproportionate amount of time and effort to do so. Too many people involved, too many manual activities, a lack of formal processes and automation. By the time a model is deployed, the market has moved, the opportunity has passed, and the model doesn't deliver the value that was expected. So to address this issue, the end-to-end AI lifecycle needs to be industrialized, automated, speeding up the deployment process, producing reliable and consistent outputs with the right level of governance, automating the monitoring and the retraining of the models in production to ultimately scale analytics-driven decisioning as part of your digital transformation. All the ingredients necessary to do that, a formal governance framework, automated processes, and the underlying capabilities can also support many of the requirements for responsible AI. In effect, with this approach, if you allow me the expression, you can kill 3 birds with 1 stone. You can scale your analytics, you can operationalize your analytics, and you can do it responsibly. So, what do you need to do this? I'm sure you're all aware of responsible AI principles: human centricity, accountability, fairness, transparency, explainability, reliability. It's very difficult to argue with the goodness of those principles. It's obvious, but they are very high level, they're vague, and they're not really actionable. It's fine to say that AI should be fair and transparent, but what does it mean in practice? How and what do we need to do differently? The first thing to do is to define your own version of responsible AI principles in line with your organization values and priorities. And that's the easy part. Then you need to contextualize those principles, because the same principles will mean something different for different companies based on the corporate culture, the countries where the AI system is developed and deployed, the industry in which you operate, and the risk associated with a specific use case. A big part of the debate about ethical AI relates to how much human should be in the loop when it comes to making decisions with algorithms, especially when those decisions are deemed to be high stake, with a potentially high impact on individuals. When you think about it, it's quite interesting to observe that humans are being tasked with overseeing algorithms that were put in place with the promise of augmenting human deficiencies, improving upon our cognitive limits and biases. It's a bit of circular logic that we have here, And that shows that human cannot be the ultimate backstop overseeing algorithmic limits and biases. Now, to be honest, it is very uncommon for algorithms, particularly in high-stakes settings, such as criminal justice, healthcare, or child welfare, to operate without human involvement and without a human making the final decision. But this human oversight must be meaningful to avoid becoming just a way to bypass scrutiny by rubber stamping automated decisions. It is not enough to say that a human should be in the loop, but the nature of the oversight should be explicit and accountable. And this is why clear roles and responsibilities are so important. Human oversight is not an antidote to algorithmic failures. Talking about roles and responsibilities, these should be formalized as part of a governance framework and operating model. It could take the shape, for example, of a cross-functional ethics board. But my recommendation is to leverage whatever governance model you already have, because it is far more effective to embed new governance requirements as part of an existing structure and process rather than creating something from scratch. Mobilizing a new set of stakeholders with a new mandate will take time, and it might bring some confusion, overlap of responsibilities, and resistance to change. But whatever governance structure you decide to adopt, you will need to consider three aspects of the mission. The first one is that you need to set it up, establishing the standards and practical guidelines that can be communicated to all the people involved with adequate training, and the formalization of the processes, the roles, and the responsibilities. The second one is to manage day-to-day operations, the orchestration of the various teams involved in the development and deployment of an AI system, the business analyst, the data scientists, the data engineers, the IT, but also legal, risk, and compliance. And the orchestration of the decision-making process between the algorithmic storing that generates a prediction, the business rules that establish the logic of the decision, and the input required from a human being. The third one is the oversight, ensuring that safeguards are in place at every stage of the AI lifecycle and monitoring the outcome and impact of the AI system. Without trying to be exhaustive, let me give you a few examples of the standards and rules that a governance model should aim to define and enforce. It should establish the method and criteria to evaluate the risk of a specific use case. And based on the risk level, the approvals needed and the implications for the development, deployment, and monitoring of the associated models. It should also develop a classification of the data to be used by predictive models between prohibited, protected, and low-risk variables, and how they should be handled during the development and the deployment process. For instance, prohibited variables should not be used as part of a model training, but they need to be available to test a model for bias. Protected variables might be used in specific contexts, but not in others, and they might need to be anonymized or masked. It should also define which biases are deemed acceptable or unacceptable, acknowledging the fact that machine learning models are bias generators by nature. I mentioned before the need for a risk assessment, and this is a key element of a responsible by design approach. Responsible AI cannot be an afterthought and need to be considered from the inception of any new use case. As recommended by the proposed EU regulation on AI, there should be a risk-based approach to establish the standards that are expected to be made at every stage of the AI lifecycle, from data to decision. The risk level should inform the level of documentation, explainability, monitoring, and oversight, and the role of human arbitration in the decisioning process. The risk assessment should clearly articulate the problem that you're trying to solve, the data that will be needed, the expected output, the success criteria, and the ethical risk. For example, if you are developing a credit scoring algorithm, outline exactly what you would like the algorithm to determine about an applicant, and highlight any data points that may unintentionally lead to bias, including the proxy variables. This also means understanding any implicit biases team members may have that could find their way into the system. And that's why we need diversity in the teams involved in developing the AI system, bringing different perspectives, both in terms of their business function, so people could be from marketing, finance, product, HR, and in terms of their own experiences and background. As part of the data preparation phase, data set should be automatically profiled to measure and rectify data quality, to identify and flag sensitive variables, for example, personal data that are protected by regulations such as the GDPR, but also variables and their proxies that could lead to unacceptable bias such as age, gender, ethnicity, and location. You should also consider the use of data anonymization or the use of synthetic data that can be handy to protect data privacy while retaining the underlying structure and statistical distribution of the original data. Analytical assets should also be managed and governed in shared repositories to provide an overview of which ones are being used in production, how they're performing, and the ability to trigger specific actions such as the retraining and replacement of models when performance or bias degrades beyond a predefined threshold. An enterprise model repository should provide metadata, versioning, and audit trails. Traceability as well is an important capability, the ability to establish the lineage from data to decisions, being able to answer questions like what data was used to train this model, what data was used to make this specific individual prediction, what model was used to make a decision, and what was the impact of the decision made. We know that bias is inevitable, but it can be detected, monitored, and remediated. It starts with the data used to train machine learning models. There should be a proactive profiling of the data set to evaluate representations from a diverse population, exploring data distributions to identify anomalies and potential bias. Training data should be representative of the target population to which the AI system will be used for. There should be also an evaluation of the model's scoring outcome to ensure that predictions are not only accurate, but also comparable across different groups and different sensitive attributes of the target population. It's important that those measurements are not left to the discretion of individual coders, but embedded as part of the data science toolkit, so it can be done automatically and consistently. And once in production, proactive and continuous monitoring should be in place to identify any drift in performances in terms of both accuracy and fairness. Dashboards should be able to surface the information in a way that is understandable even by non-specialists. Another important tool in the data science toolkit is the ability to leverage out-of-the-box explainability techniques and features such as PD, ice, lime, and shape to provide some transparency about the inner working of a model and the ability to explain individual predictions and decisions to auditors and customers. So you should be able to explain how a specific variable impacts a prediction and why a specific prediction was made, for example, when a customer was denied a loan. A decision like this is generally the result of a logical decision flow, including business rules and predictive models. Therefore, there is a need for some kind of decision auditability, the ability to explain in human language the logic of the decision making, the underlying variables that contributed to certain predictions, and how decisions, how certain predictions and how decisions impact different groups based on sensitive variables. There is often a balance to find between accuracy and explainability, and a choice that data scientists need to make about the modeling techniques. The usual recommendation here is to keep things simple as possible. Machine learning is not the answer to everything. And you need to balance the need for accuracy on one side and for transparency and explainability on the other side. Because the incremental benefit of using advanced machine learning techniques is sometimes just not worth the effort to build and deploy those models and the trade-offs in terms of explainability. So when a simple linear regression is good enough, just go for it. Programmers love to code. We know that. Some even measure their contributions in terms of KLOC, standing for 1,000 lines of code. But the amount of technical debt custom code leaves behind can reduce the velocity of innovation. Custom code can, on the other hand, also provide a competitive advantage when it comes to solving very specific critical problems. So an approach that uses low-code, no-code platforms for routine activities and tasks and custom programming for higher value activities can create the best of both worlds. On one side, you want to empower those who understand data and statistics, but might not have the time, skills, or appetite to code. And on the other side, you want to provide data scientists with the freedom to use the programming language of their choice so they can experiment and address specific issues. Both communities need to be able to work in an environment that provides self-service access to the data in a controlled fashion with the same standards when it comes to documentation, explainability, privacy, and traceability. Enabling the diverse needs and skills of your staff will go a long way towards developing the data-driven culture that you're looking for and the data literacy. This is not easy. It's one thing to create a strategy, an action plan, to name people accountable, to buy tools. But at the end of the day, we know that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's far more difficult to actually change the culture of an organization. First, because what we call culture needs to be defined and inspired at the highest level of your organization. And too often, executives are lacking the vision or the understanding of those complex issues. Culture also needs to be incarnated by all the people involved at all levels. But one cannot instruct people to suddenly become data-driven. One cannot change behaviors by simply buying a tool overnight. This is a transformation journey that requires dedication, effort, and time, but it's worth it. Taking a responsible approach towards AI adoption will not only make your organization a good citizen, but it will also deliver great value to your business. So I hope you found this session informative and that you get a pretty good idea now about how responsible AI can help build the trust necessary not only to adopt AI systems successfully, but also to realize the value from it. The principles for responsible AI are well known, but you will need to contextualize them to your industry and the specific ethical requirements that you have, embed those principles in your data and analytics strategy, and leverage existing governance frameworks such as ModelOps or MLOps, and look to infuse responsible AI requirements at every stage of your AI lifecycle. So if you're not on this road already, the journey starts now. And if you want to learn more about this, you can download this AI and ethics primer. It's on www.sas.com/AI-ethics. That's a good read and takeaway. I would like to thank you for your attention today. I think we have a bit of time for questions if there are any. I'm available for this.
Thank you, Oliver. I really love it. I will also read the AI ethics that you recommended on the SAS website. We have a question. It says, considering that governments and policies usually fall behind innovation, what are the chances that they're going to be on point with responsible AI and keep the track with it?
Well, I think we've got some good experience with regulations catching up with technical innovation. We had the GDPR a few years ago. Data privacy issues started, I don't know, as soon as social networks started, and that was 20 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And the GDPR only came around, it was a few years ago, so it was 2016, I think. So it took almost 15 years for the regulator to catch up. But I think there are a lot of learnings that the regulators have made when doing so. And we can see here that EU is leading the charge again, trying to bring some regulations around the use of AI. Now, this is not the first regulation that AI is subjected to, right? Even the GDPR already applies to AI projects, but this is the first regulation in the world that is purely focused on AI. And now the regulation has not been adopted yet. It's been proposed by the EU Commission. And we now entered, a few months ago, we entered probably what will be a couple of years of negotiations and discussions with all the different actors in the market, including thought leaders and market analysts and technical companies and all kind of people are involved in those discussions. And my guess is that those people are well informed about the latest and the trends and the directions that the technology is going, and they understand the pitfalls of and the risk of the technology, of using those technologies. So I think, it's taking time. AI is already there. Those risks that I was talking about today are already there. But it will take another couple of years before we see actually regulations being enforced by organizations such as the EU and other governments in the world. I think they're well informed and they understand the implications. They understand the complexity of this problem. And if you have any troubles actually falling asleep at night, I would suggest you start reading the GDPR, actually the regulation, which is very complex. And the future AI regulation is going to be complex because this is a complex area. So I think the regulator will catch up. They're just behind, right, as usual, and as expected. There will be also a lot of learning along the way. AI is being used today. We're already learning from it, and I'm talking to customers who are already concerned about this, already doing something about this. They're not waiting for the regulation. They know the regulation is coming, but they're already taking action today because they want to do the right thing. They're good citizens. And they also understood what I was advocating today, which is it's not just about being a good citizen, it's about driving your business effectively and securing the adoption of AI technology. So this learning process is already happening, and which will help with the regulator being on point, I think.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is, where can I find more information about current policies and rules I must follow when building a new product?
All right, that's a very difficult one. If I had a magic bullet or magical recipe, I would give it over gladly. There are a number of guidelines. It's not the lack of information that we have, is actually too much information and too many flavors of the same thing. You've seen in one of my slides today, I proposed a series of, I don't know how many, I think it was 8 principles. I don't know how many flavors of this we have out there, but it's not the issue there. We already know what principles, what responsibly I mean. But what I said in my presentation is you need to prioritize things for your specific needs first, and then you need to contextualize it, because the need to be transparent, for example, is not the same in for example, on a website that creates personalized advertisement, and a system that will inform a doctor about a potential diagnosis, right? So the level of transparency and the need for transparency is not the same. So the first thing to do is to contextualize it and to define what those principles mean to your organization in your context, in your industry, for the specific use case that you're looking to implement. Then you can get a lot of help from software vendors like SaaS or from consultancies. I can see all the big consultancies have now developed a practice around responsible AI. So there are a lot of frameworks being developed and a lot of best practices being built that you can get some good inspiration from. Yeah, maybe you can download also the primer that I was mentioning a minute ago. That would be a good starting point. And otherwise, feel free to reach out to me directly. You've got contact details over here, or contact whoever you're speaking with as part of your day-to-day work.
Awesome. And the last question is, because we don't have more time to, what is the best time to think about ethics when it comes to AI and data product cycle?
What is the right time?
In the product cycle of AI and data, when we're creating a new product, to think about ethics and ethical side of.
I think I gave the answer to that in my presentation by saying it should be from the inception. You can't work backwards, right? We know the complexity of developing predictive models, machine learning models, and then deploying those models into different environments, building data pipelines to the point of where decision can be made and the recommendation can be produced. You can't rework all of this. I mean, otherwise you have to rebuild it. So my recommendation is that you need to start at the inception level to document what is it you're trying to achieve. What is the outcome you're looking for for your specific use case? What data you will need to implement your model and to make the prediction? How this prediction is going to be used as part of a decision flow? It's never just a model. There are some business rules around. There are a logic that needs to be implemented that will take the prediction as an input. All of this needs to be documented, and as part of the documentation, you need a checklist of things to look for. What are the potential risks, ethical risks? What kind of guidelines and safeguards do we need to implement at each stage? You need to test your model for bias. You need to test the data for bias. You need to be able to explain the model. So you need to implement also explainability features as part of your data science work. So at every stage, you need to do something, which means that you have to anticipate this from the inception. That would be my advice.
Thank you. Okay, my light decided to have a light show for itself, and we have 2 more minutes for a last question. How the mentioned proposed regulation on responsible use of AI relate to the relevant standards as ICO 24028?
Okay, I'm not sure I will know the specifics there, but what I know is that there are a lot of discussions happening at different levels. The United Nations is working on this. Many governments are working on this. The EU Commission is working on this. And those people speak to each other. It's not like they're working in silos, in isolation. I think they're looking for consistency because they understand that today technology is borderless. There's no such thing as Brexit in the world of technology those days. Technology is global, so regulations will need to be global as well. Now the EU is doing what they can to lead the pack, as they often do when it comes to regulating the market. But they're not just doing it to constrain people and to add additional rules and to make it difficult. A big objective of the EU Commission is also to make the EU market more competitive when it comes to AI. So there are 2 objectives there. The first one is to provide some guidelines and consistencies about what's right and what's not right, what should be done as part of AI projects, but also to drive a market advantage, competitive advantage in the market. I think there will be a good alignment between. I'm quite optimistic that there will be no big discrepancies between the different regulations coming up in the next few years.
Thank you, Oliver. It was such an honor to host you on the Data Science Conference, and
my pleasure.
And enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Just to close this track, it was an honor to be your host today, and thank you for your attention. After the short break, and typically we have a short break now, for networking sessions. We have 15 minutes, so you can join the other tracks, and also feel free to join our Discord. We send the link in the newsletter, and join our community at Data Science Conference Europe. Thank you.